Hey, everybody. This is Vegan Theology with Kevin and Sarah Hale, episode 44. What's going on, Sarah? Hey.
At last.
Yeah.
We're getting, we're always trying to get into the rhythm. And yes, life happens. But
Yeah.
we're here and I'm excited, as always.
Yeah.
And we're here to talk about Hinduism. However, not Hinduism generally, which I had to keep reminding myself as I read this chapter. Her purpose is not to educate me on Hinduism generally. I still have several questions about Hinduism.
Right.
Her purpose in this book, and when I say her, I'm talking about Lisa Kemmerer and her book, Animals and World Religions, which we're really enjoying working through very much. Her purpose is not to give us a full picture of each of these religions. Her purpose is to tell us the core religious teachings and beliefs of these religions. What did they say about non-human animals, aka animals? Her word.
Right.
I was thinking this morning, when we start writing our own books on vegan theology, we'll have something in our intro, and we're going to be borrowing Lisa Kemmerer's word, animals.
Animals.
I think it bears repeating because I still feel like I'm getting my head around it, is a word that is simpler and less cumbersome than the phrases non-human animals, just to have a word like animals. And it also takes away some of the dualism and of just calling them animals when we are, in fact, animals as well.
Right. And I find when I'm reading the book, I stop myself and make myself pronounce it so that I'm not like glossing over it in my head. You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, and I noticed when we recorded last time, every time we went to say the word, it took a second for us to get it out. We were like, animals. We're still getting used to it. What did the early Hindu texts and core beliefs say regarding animals is the topic today. You know, another thing I keep thinking about, Kevin, is when we started this podcast, speaking for myself, I think, but maybe for both of us, I really had this impression and belief that the world of non-human animals in regards to theology is a field unexplored.
Yeah.
It's waters uncharted. It's an arena that has not been delved into. And I think we felt there's a few people talking about it, but we really need to raise our voice and to get mainstream Christianity specifically to start thinking about this. It's a topic that is worthy of study. But books like this is helping me realize that this isn't something new at all. In fact, in many ways, one of the takeaways of this book is going to be that we're actually trying to return to orthodoxy.
Yeah.
This is nothing new.
Mm-hmm.
And not just for Christianity, because we know that many church fathers and maybe even some of the apostles were vegan or vegetarian, but other religions as well, including Buddhism and things like that. When you approach a lot of people who practice Buddhism and you ask them if they're vegan, they look at you like you have three heads. And well, that's kind of Buddha's claim to fame, is he went around spreading veganism.
Yeah.
I think it's been lost. This part of our beliefs, our core beliefs, has been blanched out of our spirituality, out of our religions. But it's nothing new. We're just trying to bring us back to the core beliefs.
Right. I kind of had a similar thought too. I think these last two chapters, the indigenous traditions and then this Hindu tradition, really got me thinking about our faith in a more holistic way. And I know we talk about that, we say that, and we've studied hermeneutics and exegesis, and we consistently talk about that process. You know, we understand worldview, and we understand that we come from a Western culture, and we understand that we're reading the text from 2,000 years after it was written. That's the New Testament. The Old Testament is even earlier. And we know that we don't think, we're different. And we have to be aware of that both the New Testament and the Old Testament are in a different language. It's a different culture. It's a different time. It's different innovations in terms of technology and everything. And I feel like this book, these first two chapters, really helped me appreciate. And I know this is going to sound weird because we say these things, and it's kind of what I said last week about the indigenous traditions, or when we're talking about dualism versus monism. I can intellectually understand monism It's just living it, experiencing it is a little different. And I think for us, or for me, I feel like I really understand something more intimately if I can experience it and live it. And I feel like what's happening in reading these first 2 chapters is that, yeah, I understand what's happening, but it's causing me to go, we consistently talk about the ancient Near Eastern culture. But when I read Genesis, I still look at it and I'm aware of those things more as a technique, right? Hey, I need to be aware that this is ancient Near Eastern culture. It's very compartmentalized. And yet I think these 2 chapters are helping me to open up my mind to the idea that, Abraham, and they looked at the world very differently. They looked at the world in probably more indigenous ways, and potentially even similar to what we're going to find out about the Hindu mindset and vision. It's very holistic. It's very connected to nature and animals and all these things. And we have, from our vantage point 2,000 years after Christianity, or 21st century Christianity, is so far removed and different from the early church and the Old Testament. When we lived in Wheaton, Illinois, there was a professor that we got to know from our church, and we had a small group, and he had us read this book called Going to Church in the First Century. It's not the best book ever written, but it's by a guy named Robert Banks, and it's very short, but it was trying to give a flavor of what it might have been like to attend church in the first century and how the early church was very different than our church is today. They were more communal. There wasn't this Western individualism. There wasn't all the siloed thinking. Everybody was in community and living and sharing. It was very, I already said communal, I don't want to say socialist, but no, no, it was just very connected. And it got me thinking, after reading this Hindu thing, about our understanding of the Old Testament. We always talk about going back to early Christianity, but we never really talk about going back to early Genesis, right? So this book is kind of opening my mind to seeing it bigger than technique, bigger than hermeneutical techniques or exegetical tools, but more of a world view, that's seeing our faith maybe differently than I've been seeing it.
Yes, and another thing that I think keeps coming up along those same lines are how Western colonizer mindset our Christianity is. And I feel like this book is helping to dismantle some of that too.
Yeah.
That not everybody in the world thinks like a capitalist. Not everybody in the world thinks like a colonialist.
Right.
An industrialist. There are other ways of seeing and experiencing life in the world.
No, it's a great book.
It sure is. We're only just beginning.
I know.
And I'm very happy we're doing this project. So Hinduism. She starts this chapter with a quote from an ancient Hindu text. A lot of these texts are referred to as Vedic texts. And then there's this other text that we'll come across a lot called the Mahabharata. And I'm going to pause right here and just go ahead and say, I really did do my best and look up, Google how to pronounce a lot of these Hindu words. And I'm going to do my absolute best, I promise. But I know I'm going to mispronounce things. And I hope our listeners understand that it's not meant disrespectfully when I mispronounce these words.
I've been practicing too. Mahabharata.
So that's another text, not technically a Vedic text, but definitely one of the ancient texts that she cites a lot. And she starts out the chapter placing us geographically and within time, that basically the ancient story of Indian religions can most clearly be picked up on the banks of the Indus River around 1500 BCE. So just to get our minds on that we're talking about religions that were happening in India 1500 years before the Common Era. She starts the next paragraph roughly 4,000 years ago. So I'm thinking more like 3,500 if we're talking about 1500 BCE. But between 3,500 to 4,000 years ago, worship in the Indus Valley revolved around nature. She says, in Hindu traditions, every being is envisioned as coming from the same source and is connected with the divine. Sounds already similar to the indigenous traditions. Because animals hold something of God, Hindus are called to give other species not only respect, but reverence. The divine is in all that exists, and everything that exists is meant for the benefit of all. Human beings are not entitled to dominate. Each species is expected to live as part of the system in close relationship with other species, but without any one species dominating or exploiting others. Here we are, I feel, at a disadvantage in our Christian faith because we have as one of our core beliefs that we are here to dominate. In fact, the word dominion is used to justify dominating.
But I also feel it's a misunderstanding. I mean, I get it. That's the Christian tradition.
Yes.
But I think as we've stated, it's a misunderstood.
It's a misunderstanding of our core beliefs, our ancient texts. Yeah.
Funny, I just read an article, Sark's Journal.
Yeah.
And somebody was making this case that we need to do away with the word dominion. It's very interesting. And yeah, I guess you could say it's unfortunate that word is that way or gets translated that way in our text.
Hindu sacred writings like the Upanishads honor the many wondrous animals and every aspect of earth, including every individual of every species, as indistinct from Brahman, the eternal, perhaps best translated as God. All right, there's a lot to talk about here.
Right.
So Brahman is the word that she says is best translated as God, which is the eternal. They praise Brahman as sun, fire, wind, moon, stars, water, human, and so on. Thou art the dark blue bee. Thou art the green parrot with red eyes. Thou art the thundercloud, the seasons, the seas. And this is from the 4th Adhyana. I know she's describing this non-dual oneness of all and the sacredness of all. Again, this is something that is very non-Western, so it's hard to really feel like you're grasping it. This brings up for me, though, I know I have resistance, and we talked about this in our last episode, that as we explore these other ways of thinking and these other religions, of course there's resistance that comes up because it's just so hard to understand and it's foreign. Or we may even see some things as heretical, as held up to Christianity.
Right.
But again, she's not here to explain to us the ins and outs of Hinduism theology. She's here to talk about their relationship with animals. But the fact that there's a Brahman, the eternal, the supreme, the source, but there's all these other deities, which we will get into a little bit in this discussion. I know I have resistance coming up.
Yeah.
I have what do they actually believe? One person explained it to me recently that all these deities that we are kind of familiar with Hinduism, and there are many, right? All these deities are each representing some aspect of the Brahman or of God.
Right.
Some people say Hinduism, there's an argument to be made that Hinduism really isn't polytheist. They really do believe in one supreme God.
Yeah.
But they have all these deities who in some way can represent an aspect.
Right. I feel like we're familiar with that with some of the ancient Near Eastern religions. But I just want to say, too, because this came up for me this past week when I was reading this and thinking about the indigenous traditions when we talk about duality and non-duality, or I use the word monism, and our Trinity. You know, I think early in my Christian faith, I thought in very dualistic terms, and I still think in very dualistic terms. But many scholars in Trinitarian theology are suggesting that our God, our Trinity, us, we are non-dualistic. And so that's a whole nother discussion, but it's just interesting to think about. Did you think about the Trinity this week in relation to this?
No. And I just have a question. Do you mean that some people say that we are polytheists?
Well, I'm not saying that, but critics say that. That, hey, you Christians, you claim you're monotheistic, but in fact, you believe in three gods. And of course, we like to argue that no, it's one God, three entities or persons. And then, of course, we get all convoluted in our definition of person. So I'm not saying that, but what I'm trying to say is that reading this, it's possible that we could argue kind of what you're already saying is that many Western people who are not Hindu are mischaracterizing Hinduism, Hindu gods, that they are polytheistic. And as you're suggesting, maybe some have said we're not. Each god is a variation of Brahman. I'm not making a case. I'm just saying that reading this made me think about our Trinity and how I grew up thinking about God and myself in dualistic terms. And many Christian scholars, I don't know if it's a trend in the last 10 years or so, are kind of reminding everyone that actually the Trinity is non-dual. It's a holistic being entity. And again, that's a whole nother topic. I'm just saying the Trinity came up for me as I was reading this. I don't know if it came up for you.
It didn't. No, but it's making me chuckle. It is an interesting thing to bring up in this context.
Right. Well, no, because someone could say, no, you guys are polytheistic. And we're like, no, we're not. And we can go back and forth. And no, but you're polytheistic. So.
Yes. To the Hindu, the ground is sacred. The rivers are sacred. The sky is sacred. The sun is sacred. Indian religious traditions cultivate humility, reverence, and awe by seeing God everywhere. By seeing God everywhere. For the Hindu, all of nature, all of the universe is sacred. All right. Now, the way this paragraph is written resonates for me as a Christian. Isn't that what we're called to do as Christians? See God everywhere.
Yeah.
Or even the way this paragraph began, because animals hold something of God. What comes up for me is the Quakers, the Friends, who one of their core tenets is the light of the divine is within each of us.
Right.
And I think about the Psalms, the heavens declare the glory of God. Talk about how different aspects of creation, each praises God, represents God, reveals something about God, has its own relationship with God. Like this all resonates perfectly for me as a Christian. So I would say it's been really bleached out of our theology because it sounds pagan to our ear.
Sounds new agey.
She started the chapter with slightly different language, that all that exists is God.
Right.
Isn't that slightly different? Like if I believe that this potted plant sitting next to us is God, is slightly different than saying that something of God is in that plant.
Yes.
So sometimes I feel like, does this all boil down to semantics? We just have a slightly different way of saying the same thing.
Right, but that has been the case of church history and all the ecumenical councils and working out the theology of what all the different branches of Christianity believe about Christ and about the Trinity and about God. And it's all semantics. What do they say about Jesus? That he's begotten, not made.
Yeah.
That he doesn't emanate from the Father. Things like this. It's all, there have been all kinds of arguments.
Right, where people actually were ostracized or
called heretics.
Or executed.
Yeah, exactly.
She's going to start this chapter talking about the pillars around Hindu philosophy and morality. And a lot of these are things that we're not unfamiliar with. She starts out by talking about their reverence for cows, for example. I think a lot of us have heard about how Hindus have a special relationship with cows.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with that. There's other things that I know are not unfamiliar to us as Westerners. She's going to talk about reincarnation a little bit, karma, and how that leads to their diet. Some things that might not be as familiar to a Westerner is the concept of ahimsa. I'm really getting more and more the impression that that is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Is ahimsa, which I'll just go ahead and say is nonviolence. And then also their concept of oneness. So we're going to kind of take these one by one because I think they are each really important. She starts with the reverence for cows. Cows are praised and respected in Hindu traditions because they exemplify munificence and mother's love. And I did look up munificence. Lavishly generous. They see cows as being lavishly generous and the ideal mother's love. Very different than the Western way of looking cows. And she actually says that, a species that Westerners tend to disparage as stupid and expendable. So already our mind is having to open up a little bit. What it would be like to live in a culture where cows were actually seen as the ideal when it came to being loving mothers. Vedic texts reveal the historic shift from more barbaric times when cows were killed to a more enlightened time of preserving their lives. I think that's interesting. Mm-hmm. These texts are being written 1500 BCE, and they are saying, let's get away from barbarism
right.
of killing these cows. Let's go into more of an enlightened existence as humans.
Right.
And actually preserve their lives.
Reading from Kimmerer. Indians speak of mother cow love as ideal love, and Indian literature often compares a good human mother to a cow mother. A good mother runs to those in need as a cow runs to her calf. Indeed, cows are protective and dutiful mothers, and their distress is both audible and visible when their calves are in danger, or when their calves are forcibly taken from them, as routinely happens in the dairy industry. Protecting cows, whom we might easily harm or kill, is an expression of compassion that acknowledges both our power over other creatures and our own vulnerability before the gods, our needs for protection from that which is more powerful and potentially deadly. We are also related to and dependent on the whole creation and on the munificence and compassion of powerful gods.
That's really interesting that part of their core beliefs is saying, yeah, we could easily kill them. By giving them that compassion of protecting them, it's like a picture of how we could be easily killed by the gods.
Right.
We are vulnerable as well.
Right.
It's almost like, how could we expect the gods to have compassion on us if we are not compassionate on those that we could easily kill?
Right. To withhold your power is actually a form of power, and it's a form of spiritual maturity. So practicing compassion and practicing ahimsa is a form of power. It's a form of exercising power.
Wow. Yes. She says, when we protect those who are least able to protect themselves, we show an understanding of the vulnerability of life in general and of our own vulnerability. In this sense, the Hindu attitude toward cattle is symbolic of reverence and respect for all forms of life. As the earth and gods nurture us, so we must nurture others who are in need. Okay, now we get into ahimsa. She starts by saying ahimsa is the first and foremost ethical principle of every Hindu, who is required to abstain from causing hurt or harm to all beings. Ahimsa literally means not to harm or non-injury, and carries an injunction for non-injury toward all living beings. It's usually translated as non-violence, but ahimsa is not simply a matter of refraining from actual physical harm. Ahimsa is the absence of even a desire to do harm to any living being in thought, word, or deed. And I appreciate that. That comes up a lot in their theology, in their philosophy and morality. It's not just about what you do, it's also about what you think.
But that's also
and
gospel,
what you desire, yes, and what you say. I completed my 200-hour yoga teacher training, as many of you know, and ahimsa comes up in yoga. It's the first of 7 yamas. The 7 yamas are all things that we have to avoid. That's how it's structured within the yoga philosophy. So the first thing we have to avoid is violence. A is without, ahimsa is violence. You know, as a vegan, I was really excited to get to this topic and to talk about ahimsa. And of course, I was dismayed to find that nobody in the room, including the teachers, by the way, really take this seriously. Certainly not when it comes to our dealings with animals. It's kind of saying like, well, you know, the men who came up with yoga were kind of extreme. So we just need to take what actually serves us, is the thought pattern. And yeah, it reminds me a lot of how we as Christians can read something over and over and over again and get really familiar with a theological mandate and kind of water it down.
Right.
In Hindu traditions, the common Christian precept to love thy neighbor as thyself is enhanced so that every living being is thy neighbor.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
I think no matter what religion people claim to be, the truths can be there, but we can choose how far we want to take them. We can choose how much we want to apply them. and in which situations we want to apply them.
Right. I do a classical radio show for a local radio station in Bozeman, Montana. And I sometimes have musicians and composers reach out to me and ask me to play their stuff, which I do. One particular composer from Brooklyn, he had a piece called Ahimsa. It's a nice little suite, and he wanted me to play it. And I'm like, sure. I called him, we talked, and I asked him if he was vegan. And he's like, oh, no, I'm not vegan. And it was fascinating because he continues to write things on war and peace and these kinds of things.
Sure.
And it's very human-centered. No, I love the guy. I love his music. And he's been very prolific. It just made me think we're all on different journeys, right? But every time I hear the word ahimsa, I think of him in his suite. And kind of what you're saying here, we maybe don't take it literally or with its full meaning. Right. Ahimsa isn't just for humans. It's for all of nature, all animals, all living beings.
Here we're seeing where the Western dualism, anthropocentrism, colonialism thinking, ahimsa means I should really be nice to the people I live with, the people in my family, the people I work with, the people on the road in front of me and behind me. And that's as far as we go. Whereas we're learning, this book is illuminating, the ancient Vedic religion would have never stopped there.
Right.
To them, you should have ahimsa for every single creature around you. The text called the Rig Veda notes that those of faith must protect both the two-legged and four-legged and provide water and food for all creatures in need. Reminds me of what God asked us to do in the garden. The Yajur Veda speaks on behalf of God's creatures, whether they are human or animal, warning that no life is expendable. In the Mahabharata, the deity encourages devotees to understand all beings as like ourselves. This comes up a lot.
Yeah.
They are basically the same as us in all the ways that matter.
Right.
They are as like ourselves and to treat them accordingly. And a 13th century Hindu poet teaches the following: let universal friendship reign among all beings.
Continuing on, Mahatma Gandhi, likely the most famous Hindu internationally, believed that ahimsa was not only a way of life, but an eternal quality of truth itself. According to Gandhi, if a man practices ahimsa as a religious commitment, the spring of all his actions is compassion, and he shuns to the best of his ability the destruction of the tiniest creature, tries to save it, and thus incessantly strives to be free from the deadly coil of himsa, harm or violence. Consequently, Gandhi shunned animal sacrifice, which not only kills, but kills the most vulnerable beings. He noted that sheep would purely have their own accounting of such deeds. And this is a quote from his autobiography. To my mind, the life of a lamb is no less precious than that of a human being. I should be unwilling to take the life of a lamb for the sake of the human body. I hold that the more helpless a creature, the more entitled it is to protection by man from the cruelty of man. That's Andrew Lindsay. I mean, that's...
You're talking about the more helpless a creature, the more entitled it is to protection.
Absolutely. That's what something Andrew Lindsay says, and I feel like that is the essence of animal theology.
Yeah. That is something that is written on our hearts.
Yeah.
That is why child abuse is so upsetting to us. Someone who is incapable of defending themselves, needs more protection, is due protection. It's a obligation to protect.
I feel like it's one of the main tenets of our stewardship.
Yeah. While the Hindu worldview holds that people have no special privilege or authority over other creatures, human beings do have more obligations and duties to other creatures.
Yeah. I mean, that's stewardship right there.
I think that sums up what we've been trying to argue. Christianity sees humans as having all the special privilege and all the authority, but does not see human beings as having more obligations.
Right.
And duties. And again, Andrew Lindsay, the servant species.
Right.
The image of God is actually calling us to be the servant species of all creation.
Fascinating.
In the Mahabharata, the poetic voice of the deity reminds readers that there is no religious practice that surpasses that of nonviolence. If you don't get anything else right as a Hindu, make sure you get nonviolence right.
Right.
Nothing else surpasses that. Hindu gods and heroes are praised for compassion in India's sacred literature. Power over others is always to be used compassionately, and restraint with one's powers when dealing with the weak and vulnerable is the hallmark of a Hindu hero.
That's so different from our Western heroes.
I keep thinking about how does this compare to our mythologies, even outside of the biblical text. Do we teach our children that to be a real hero is to take care of the vulnerable? Kemmerer gives us an example from India's sacred literature of one of these stories. The hero in this story is Yudhisthira, and he finds himself traveling in a great desert with 5 companions. He's befriended on this journey by a small brown dog. Unfortunately, in this story, all of his beloved human companions die for want of water, and yet the dog somehow survives. The god Indra arrives to rescue Yudhisthira from the death desert and says, your friends have all gone before. I'm here to take you to eternal paradise and bliss. Indra says, climb into my chariot. I'll take you to join your fallen companions. And Yudhisthira says, Lord of the past and present, this little dog who is my last companion must also go. No, said Indra, you cannot enter heaven with a dog at your heels. He was devoted to me and looks to me for protection. Left alone, he would die here. There is no place for dogs in heaven. It cannot be. Don't you understand? You have won heaven. Immortality and prosperity and happiness in all directions are yours. Only leave that animal and come with me. I do not turn away from my dog. I turn away from you. I will not surrender a faithful dog to you. But I can't take him. I'll put him to sleep. There will be no pain. Lord of heaven, said Yudhisthira, you have my permission to go. Your splendor will fill the 3 worlds if you will but enter my car alone, said Indra. You have left everyone else. Why not this worthless dog? I am decided, answered Yudhisthira. The story is painting this glorious hero. And why is he glorious? Because he gives up eternal paradise and immortality and prosperity, comfort and relief from his current suffering, just because he cares about the life of this little dog.
Yeah.
He's even willing to stand up to this powerful God, this deity, and say, I will never abandon this dog to die. Ultimately, the stray dog transforms into Yudhisthira's father, Dharma, the god of moral and eternal law. And Dharma praises Yudhisthira for his steadfast commitment to protect and accompany a small common brown mutt in need, even against the will of an extremely powerful god. Hindu moral law says that ahimsa is a basic, essential, and unwavering moral law, critical to spirituality and salvation. And people are expected to be mindful and protective of all living beings. Next is reincarnation. We kind of know a little bit about what that means. Reincarnation, otherwise known as transmigration, is the belief that after death, the imperishable atman, generally and perhaps best translated as soul, lodges in another body, whether in an Indian striped hyena, Bengal riverfish, Caucasian human, cow, or dog. Indian philosophy holds that time has no meaning. Reincarnation has been in play for unending eons. Across incalculable ages, each Atman, or soul, has moved from birth to birth, from body to body, dwelling in billions of individuals from innumerable species. Each of us has been a squirrel, a shrew, a blue whale, she goes on. So in a very real sense, that in the Hindu mind, a dog is a pig, is a rat, is a boy, which takes some work to get your head around as a Westerner. Reincarnation creates bonds between every living being and diminishes our tendency to view ourselves as an individual, separate entity. So I can get that logically. If I believe that you and I have existed forever, and we've each been born as all these different animals, it does kind of melt down and dissolve any willingness to abuse or kill
right.
other beings. Reincarnation requires Hindus to see themselves in every living being and to see every living being in self, supporting and fostering ahimsa. So these concepts go hand in hand, clearly.
Next section in this book, karma. Karma means action. Actions determine karma. Karma is an unavoidable force, like gravity. Karma is a force of justice whereby every act carries with it an inevitable result. Mm-hmm. That's really a sense of justice.
I would love to believe in karma.
Yeah.
But I don't know that God's economy, God's justice, in my experience, backs up karma. I would love to see when somebody really does something egregious that their lives fall apart, like in a good movie. But I don't see that happening.
But really, how many conservative Christians actually believe in a form of karma? How you live on this earth, you're going to pay for it later in eternity.
The thing I'm wondering about currently, okay, and obviously I have a lot more studying to do and a lot more understanding to acquire, but my understanding in the past, and this came up again as I was reading this, is karma can lead to a lack of compassion for other beings. Because if you're born an untouchable or you're born a rat, that means in a past life you were a jerk. So you deserve to suffer. Who am I to argue against the universe that brought you back as a homeless person or whatever? I'm not going to help you. Why would I help you?
Right, you have a lesson to learn.
Yes. So I think that misapplied, or I don't really know. Again, I'm still learning. But I could see how a belief in karma could actually be a detraction from having free-flowing compassion and benevolence. I do like what she says here. Motive is critical. It's not just what you do. You're still going to accumulate bad karma, even if you do the right thing for the wrong reason. You need to do the right thing in your thoughts, in your words, in your desires, and in your actions in order to actually accumulate good karma.
Next, Kemmerer talks about the concept of oneness. The divine, the eternal Brahman, dwells in the atman of every creature. That's the soul of every creature. The Brahman in every atman is identical. All animals have atman/Brahman, and through Brahman/Atman, each creature is linked to every other creature and to Brahman. A holy person sees himself in the heart of all beings, and he sees all beings in his heart. Brahman lies behind and within each of us, as well as within all that we see and know. In this spiritual vision, no individual is an island. Each of us shares Brahman, the eternal, with every other animal. This great being dwells in the heart of all creatures as their innermost self. His hands and feet are everywhere. His eyes and mouths are everywhere. His ears are everywhere. He pervades everything in the universe. The Upanishads remind Hindus that each being is the one that lies behind all.
As you're reading that, what comes up for me is the Christian concept of love. We are called to love generously, without limits, as God does. If you see every creature the way that they're describing here, we all have a soul that connects us to God.
Right.
The feeling that comes up is love.
Right. We're saying all animals have a soul and they're sacred.
And that soul connects them to God.
Right. And the soul that we have as humans is the same soul that animals have. Especially if you think about the concept of reincarnation, it's that soul. That's why they believe in this interpenetrability. It's that soul that's taking on different forms.
Yeah.
It's the same soul.
Speaking to Arjuna, Krishna says the following: when a man sees me in all, and he sees all in me, then I never leave him, and he never leaves me. He who in this oneness of love, there's love, loves me in whatever he sees. Wherever this man may live, in truth, this man lives in me, and he is the greatest yogi. He whose vision is ever one, when the pleasure and pain of others is his own pleasure and pain. God in himself is the same God in all that is. He hurts not himself by hurting others. We're kind to others, and by doing so, we're being kind to ourselves. And hurting others, we're actually hurting ourselves. Do you remember like the passage where Jesus, I think at the Last Supper or near the end, during Passion Week for sure, he has this little speech where he's, I am in the Father and the Father is in you, and I am in you, and you are in me. And right. I think that we as Christians sometimes are like, man, that seems really weird, strange language. It reminds me of this, though.
Yeah.
It feels like there's some commonality in the sentiment.
Well, in this passage right here, the divine, in this case Krishna, then reveals himself as the form of the great god Vishnu, and also as indwelling in every individual. I am the life of all living beings. All beings have their rest in me. In all living beings, I am the light of consciousness. When I read that,
yeah,
I was thinking exactly the passage you're talking about.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. So, of course, all of these concepts of karma, of reincarnation, of ahimsa, of oneness has a direct impact on their diet. And a lot of us as Westerners know this. I love how she pulls out that even after however many years of British colonialism and Western influence, the majority of Hindus are still vegetarians. The Western influences were not able to weed that out.
Yeah.
It's so deep within
You're right.
their beliefs. In the Hindu worldview, killing animals for food is sacrilegious, perhaps best viewed as spiritual suicide. Flesh cannot be obtained without injury, and injury to sentient beings is detrimental to the attainment of heavenly bliss. So we ought to shun meat, says their text. Refusing flesh is considered both appropriate conduct and one's dharma. Dharma meaning one's duty. And she quotes from the Mahabharata here, nonviolence is the highest dharma. Nonviolence is the highest austerity. If there were no meat eaters, there would be no killers. A meat-eating man is a killer indeed.
There's a little sentence where she says, eating cows is particularly base for Hindus, but flesh eating in general remains spiritually abhorrent. Like how warped is it that we're eating flesh?
Yeah. That's a great thing about exposing ourselves to other cultures. It does start to strip away and let in a little light where all of a sudden you're looking at something in a totally clearer way.
Right.
Like that, where you were just reading from meat eating is little better than cannibalism.
I know.
It resonates for us. Of course, she starts talking about Gandhi, which is very fitting. Gandhi is an amazing person. And I still want to learn more about him, too. Yeah. Did his nonviolence, was that really what caused the British to be like, yeah, we'll leave? Yeah. I mean, if that's literally true, I'm like, I got to know this story more. He noted that in order to get meat, we have to kill, and he felt that spiritual progress demands at some stage that we should cease to kill our fellow creatures for the satisfaction of our bodily wants. We as a species, if we're going to make any spiritual progress, let's stop killing and eating our fellow creatures.
Right, especially as we've said before, it is not necessary nutritionally.
Yes. Thank you for saying that, because that's what comes up in this section on diet and the next section on hunting. Is it's very clear in the Hindu mind that eating animals is a choice. It is an option. It is not necessary for survival or health.
Right.
Now, this might say everything about the fact of their geographical climate. In India, as I would assume, you can grow ample food year-round.
Yeah.
Just because of their temperate climate. In the Hindu mind, eating animals is completely unnecessary. And so for a person to make that choice is disgusting to them. In their sacred literature stories, hunters are mocked. They're viewed as incompetent and greedy and bloodthirsty. And always the message is that flesh is a choice. Hunters are not models of moral virtue. She tells a specific story from the Panchatantra. It's a compilation of stories. In this story, there's a friendship between a crow, pigeon, mouse, tortoise, and deer, and they work together to escape a cruel and greedy hunter. When deer becomes caught in a hunter's trap, crow quickly carries mouse over to chew through the bindings. Tortoise comes along slowly to see if his friend is safe, but as deer is released, the hunter arrives taking the slow-moving tortoise away in fresh binds. The remaining friends hatch a scheme to save tortoise. Deer lies by a nearby lake as if freshly dead, with crow pretending to peck his eyes. The greedy hunter drops tortoise and rushes over to claim the dead deer. Meanwhile, mouse chews through the leather bindings to free tortoise, who slips into the lake. Deer then leaps up and dashes off, as does mouse, while crow lifts into the wind.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
You can see how this story shows the animals as having personalities,
right,
having souls and compassion, whereas the hunter is the clear villain.
Right.
In the story.
And I was imagining like a little Disney cartoon happening.
See, that is something too. I mean, how many children's movies, kind of to our point earlier, do show animals escaping the hunter, and everybody cheers for Bambi,
right,
or whomever, who don't get caught by the evil hunters. Yeah, but somehow we just like, oh, aren't those cute little childish stories that you need to outgrow at some point?
Yeah. Yeah, and this section was really interesting. It was called Vishnu's Incarnations. Vishnu's incarnation as a fish, in which he saves many from the Great Flood. Oh, that's pretty interesting, huh?
I know. Great Flood. So far, it's come up in every chapter.
Right. Is explained in the Matsya Purana, the oldest of the post-Vedic texts. The Puranas, which record history, cosmology, and Hindu philosophy. In this story, Vishnu identifies a man who is worth saving from the upcoming deluge based on his compassion. On hearing of the great and inevitable flood, the man's only wish is to be able to protect the multitude of all beings, moving and still.
So, like, if you superimpose Noah onto this man,
right,
who the God says, I need to save from this flood, this one specifically because of his compassion. And in this story, the Noah figure, if I can call him that, is the one that pleads for the animals to be saved. She goes on, because Vishnu has seen the man's goodness, Vishnu places a tiny fish in front of him while he is performing oblations. The man perceives the little swimmer's vulnerability and protects the fish in a small container, which the fish quickly outgrows. The fish then cries, save me, I have come to you for refuge. The man moves the fish from one container to another until this Vishnu fish becomes so gigantic that he must be turned loose in the sea. The god fish then returns the favor, saving humanity from the great flood by telling the man how to build a large boat. When the flood comes, the fish pulls the man and his boat over the waters to safety. In this flood story, Vishnu, in the form of a fish, affirms a devout man's worthiness by witnessing his compassion for all living beings.
Interesting, yeah.
I don't even know what to make of this. The fact that it looks to me so far like all the people around the world have a great flood.
I know.
In their mythology that they were saved from by divine intervention.
Yeah. I was just thinking the difference between the Hindu idea, what saves humanity is humanity's compassion, but in Judeo-Christian story.
I don't remember anyone ever phrasing it that way. Noah was a compassionate man. He's definitely held up as one of the few who are not violent.
Well, I was going to say it's God's compassion.
Yeah.
God had compassion on, in various times it says God had compassion on humanity or whatever, and therefore did certain things. But he obviously had grace and compassion on Noah because Noah was the most devout at the time, given the relative nature of everyone.
She has a section in this chapter on Jain philosophy and morality. The world harbors only 4.2 million Jains, most of whom are Indian and live in India. Jain religious traditions emerged from Vedic/Hindu religious traditions during the Upanishadic era in the 6th century. Jains, like Buddhists, are deeply indebted to the earlier Indian beliefs and practices for such concepts as reincarnation, karma, and ahimsa. In fact, she says, ahimsa is the central ethical principle of Jainism, embodied in the often quoted statement, ahimsa paramo dharma, which means ahimsa is the highest duty. The centrality of ahimsa to Jainism is difficult to exaggerate. In the Jain worldview, acts of violence carry the worst karmic effects. Basically, they have these practices of walking with whisk brooms to brush away insects who might otherwise inadvertently be crushed underfoot. They wear face masks to avoid inadvertently inhaling insects or microorganisms. At the end of their yearly calendar, Jains have a time of the year where they ask forgiveness for any harms they might have done, whether to human or non-human, whether purposefully or inadvertently. Kemmerer is going to end each chapter talking about real life animal liberationists.
Nice.
So, of course, she has to mention in some detail Mahatma Gandhi.
Right.
The more I learn about him, the more fascinated I am. But the part of this section about Gandhi that really stuck out to me, and I hadn't necessarily heard before, in addition to all of his civil disobedience and his belief that ahimsa left no room for cowardice, it also required him, in his mind, to break laws and challenge the highest political authorities. And it was all about standing up for the oppressed, standing up for the vulnerable. And she mentions that even though he was arrested numerous times, the British weren't stupid and they only gave him one trial because they knew every time they put him on trial, it was giving him a platform that only strengthened his following.
Right.
But the thing that really stuck out to me is how much he emphasized courage. It starts out by saying, he felt it was wrong to be free under a government that is wholly bad. A government that is evil has no room for good men and women, except in its prisons.
Wow.
Okay, so that's pretty radical. He was always talking about perseverance and not giving up despite challenges, despite setbacks. He says his followers, they must not lose faith in themselves or in this mission because they may be in a minority. Indeed, all reform has been brought about by the actions of minorities in all countries and under all time. Majorities simply follow minorities. As a vegan, I guess on some level we are vegan activists or animal liberationists. It feels really nourishing to read stuff like this, that it's okay to be the minority.
Yeah.
Minorities have always been the ones who have brought about real change.
Right.
He says, strength of numbers is the delight of the timid. The valiant in spirit glory in fighting alone. Gandhi exemplifies and encouraged unrelenting activism against the powerful to liberate the oppressed. She goes on to describe some other current Hindu animal liberationists. The one I really want to focus on is named Anuradha Sani. Do you want to read some of that?
Sure. Anuradha Sani is also a firm vegan, a Hindu, and an animal activist. She was placed in charge of the Indian branch of the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, or PETA India, in 2000. Her work keeps her on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is not just a job, but a calling. I love animals, and now I fight for animals. I make a difference in their lives. Actually, my work is more than a profession. It is a fight for justice. Sani explains what motivates her to continue this difficult work. My heart cries out when I see an animal suffering. Abhorrence of injustice drives me. I hate knowing that just because an animal is unable to stand up for himself or herself, human beings take advantage and cause harm. Have you ever looked into the eyes of a bull pulling a loaded cart all day long without rest? Have you looked into the eyes of a horse left to stand in the monsoon rain and tropical sun alike? Have you looked into the eyes of a dog who has been beaten by his human? Their incomprehension, their pain drives me, makes me work harder in search of justice.
Some of the things that she's done. Sani rescues bears and tigers from India's street entertainers. These unhappy individuals can never be returned to the wild, but must be housed in sanctuaries. Their teeth have been removed, and of course, they can never again live free in the wild without their teeth. Additionally, a hole large enough for a rope has been burned through their noses, allowing the street entertainers to control these understandably unwilling bears. No painkillers are used for breaking teeth or burning holes.
Exploiting and damaging bears and tigers for entertainment is illegal in India. When Sani receives information on where to find misused bears, she must move quickly and carefully, coordinating her actions with officers of the law. She notifies appropriate authorities, then uses her years of experience and boundless determination to deftly snatch the bears while police arrest the offenders. Once rescued, the bears are placed in sanctuaries where they live free of ropes, free from human contrivance for the rest of their lives. PETA India, under Sani's leadership, has rescued 12 bears and has helped to rescue over 53 tigers and lions.
She says, I was unaware of the cruelty prevalent in the dairy industry. Through PETA, I learned how the dairy industry treats cows and their calves. Cattle, once revered partners in Hindu culture, part of our spirituality and considered part of our families, now endure dreadful lives and miserable deaths in the dairy industry. She talks more about her spirituality. I've always believed that spirituality requires compassion, helping those who cannot help themselves, forces us to find the courage to speak up. I believe that if I love my work and help another soul, I am living out good karma. I believe that every action in my life has taken me to this point where I stand today. I have wound through many different avenues to get here, but I am finally doing what I love most, and I feel it would not have been possible without divine intervention. I believe that there is a higher power that is guiding and directing my actions, and it is all these actions throughout my life that are helping me to help animals.
That's amazing.
It's beautiful. The last thing she writes from Sani is a quote where she says, being compassionate towards animals comes easy because I am a Hindu.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's what's wonderful about this book and these chapters is the value it has for our faith, learning about these other traditions, and the parallels are kind of remarkable. I think when we started this whole thing, I was a little nervous about studying other traditions on this podcast, but yet I feel it's really turning very valuable. And I think when we started, I said, I feel like I'm going to get a better sense of stewardship from reading this book. And I feel like that is happening. These Hindu traditions and the indigenous traditions, they're a lot more holistic and they're a lot more balanced. And the respect for the entire world, for other animals, it's all there. And it's something we should be paying attention to.
Yeah, their idea of stewardship is better than traditional mainstream Western Christianity and is more true or more in line with biblical stewardship. I agree with you. Next episode, we will discuss the chapter on Buddhism.
Nice.
Which I'm very excited about.
Yeah.
Learning more about that too.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Yeah, so thank you, Kevin. It was a really fun conversation with you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah, likewise. All right, take care.
Have a good day. Bye.
Later.